literally today, you just announced that you sold a majority stake in Shepherd.
Yeah, it's a weird, I got my wife, I was like, hey, I think it's going to be an account. You want to log in with me, do this together. And you see the number and we're both like, I don't know how to react. Do we jump up and down? It was kind of like this awkward, exciting experience, and then I went and played pickleball with some neighborhood buddies that was planned and came home and went to bed. It was just, it's still a normal day.
So dude, this is a crazy, huge day. I think you just got a massive wire transfer. Is that correct?
Yeah, funny timing with recording this and the timing of the deal. Yeah, it went through yesterday.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. But can you just introduce yourself to people who don't know you? Maybe give a little 3-minute overview of who you are and your businesses.
So I'm Marshall Haas. The long or short version of my story is I used to want to be an architect. When I was a kid, I worked at a firm, had no idea about business, started getting exposed to the billionaires that we all look up to. My first business was an architectural rendering little agency that was quite small, just enough to buy beer money was kind of my first business. Thought I wanted to be an architect, eventually dropped out of school and did a project management app with you. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, why don't you tell everyone how you and I met?
So my first company that I ever got some funding for was, at the time it was called Absorb. Weird name. I think I just got a .com domain. It's all cringy looking backwards. We're kind of running out of money and you had launched, I think it was called Design Capital at the time. And I kind of pitched you a Hail Mary, hey, we've got about 10 months of cash off the bank. Why don't we partner on something? I'll lead it. My co-founder is a developer. You guys provide design. And that's kind of how we started working together. We launched this thing called Peak, which was basically an automated way to kind of see what your team was up to.
Still kind of a good idea.
Yeah, I think the intention was very well intended to not shoulder tap, your team, but still be able to kind of see what they're up to. But I think the backlash was oh, this is Big Brother, kind of micromanaging.
It was kind of like friend feed back in the day, but for work. So it'd be this person posted this on GitHub. This person is working on this document in Dropbox, all that kind of stuff. I feel like it was one of those things I still want it,
I think too, at the time there was some janky workarounds we had to do to kind of get certain things coming to the feed. And so some things were less elegant than we wanted. But yeah, that's how we met. I started working for you and then joined kind of the software business as a whole.
And then you left, and what did you do after that?
So around the same time, I started getting interested in e-com. A guy named John Wheatley and I formed a studio together called Need Want. Just had a bunch of different ideas for e-commerce products. So the most successful was Peel, which was a super thin iPhone case. That was around for 10 plus years. That was a fun business. And then we had a bunch of other stuff that was less successful. We had a bedding company called, a bed sheet company called Smart Bedding. The idea was to kind of cut down the time it takes to make your bed with kind of a unique design to it with how the top sheet and the duvet cover connected. And that was kind of the next successful one. We had a notebook company called Mod Notebooks. It was kind of like Moleskine, but when you're done with the notebook, you could mail it back to us. And there was a whole scanning component and it would upload to Dropbox and Evernote and stuff like that. So we launched 4 or 5 of these. I think only about 3 of them were successful and did that for about 10 years until my most recent company.
You were based in St. Louis. Where you're not there anymore, and you bought a building. You did some kind of interesting stuff in real estate. Do you want to talk about that?
So we had an office in downtown St. Louis. When some of the e-commerce stuff hit a rocky point, I started Airbnb being my loft that I owned. And at one point it was doing $4,000 or $5,000 a month. It was making more money than we were paying ourselves. I was just man, this is awesome. What was a rough time turned into a nice side hustle. And I always thought man, if I could just have 10 more of these, I'd be set. The office or the building that we had our office in, one day property manager came around and, introduced himself and said the building was going in foreclosure, and it was an opportunistic timing thing. And we looked at it and put a deal together and ended up buying it with me, my old co-founder, and then you and Chris got in on the deal. And I think we did 14 short-term rentals, and there's about 9 loft office spaces. So kind of spun up boutique hotel in a way without the front desk. But yeah, that thing was really fun operating for quite a while. It was definitely a different experience than anything digital. It was like kind of the first brick and mortar thing and only brick and mortar thing I ever did.
And then how did you go from selling iPhone cases and running a short-term rental business to Shepherd?
I mean, really my entire career, like not being in Silicon Valley, I was always working remotely with people. So I was always comfortable with that. The natural extension is to start, like I read the 4-Hour Work Week when I was 17 or 18, got exposed to that whole idea. And that first business that I had doing architectural renderings, the team that did the actual rendering work happened to be in the Philippines. And so we were basically just like a marketing, company selling it. And so when we did the e-commerce thing, like we had operations and customer support overseas. It was just kind of always a thing that ever since my first company we did, because we just couldn't afford domestic people for a lot of roles. I just noticed over, a long period of time, my friends' businesses, they were just hiring domestic people or, who's in their town even, but definitely just like US or Canadian. It just kind of shocked me. It was kind of like a cheat code for us and allowed us to like have decent margins or survive really rough periods. So honestly, it was when COVID hit, I had this thinking always where a lot of these startups that are huge now got started in like the 2008 crash. And I worked at an architecture firm during that. I remember all these guys that are 50 years old getting laid off. And, then fast forward years later, there's also all these startups that were formed during that same period that are worth billions. And I always promised myself if there was a big thing like that, I would kind of buckle down and look at like what the needs are and try to start something new. And so during COVID, I just kind of like locked myself in my office and was just looking at different ideas I could start. And Shepherd was kind of the one that I think hit. My co-founder was wanting to do something together. And I just looked at like, what are the things that has worked for us and what do my friends' companies need? And that was kind of the genesis of the idea, basically help my friends that are small business owners hire overseas and kind of hold their hand through that.
How's the business model work now?
It's still the same model from when we started. Like we're going to expand probably to other services in that space, but I had no idea what a headhunter was until shortly after starting it. I read about the business model and like a throwaway line in a book I happened to be reading, not about headhunting, but yeah, we use the simple headhunter model, which is you come to us, hey, I'm looking for a person to do X role. Great. We take a small deposit that's completely refundable just to know people are serious. And then we go out and find that person, and then the customer only pays if and when we find, someone that they want to hire. So it's kind of a success only model, win-win. It's an easy sell to get people in the door. And then our fee is basically a percentage of the presumed first year salary, which, when I was starting it, I looked at doing managed services and, I always wanted to do something that was recurring revenue. I was always jealous of all my friends that had that, but yeah, it's a really cash flow positive way to charge for your services. Is just that big upfront once you find someone.
It's so funny. I remember when COVID hit, everyone was like, oh my God, this is crazy, remote work. And I think you and I had both been doing it for me, I've been doing it for 15 plus years. Everyone was like, oh my God, I can work in Colorado and make San Francisco comp. And that kind of happened for a while, right? I think suddenly everybody was like, oh, cool, I can access jobs anywhere in the world. But I don't think anyone realized was that, first a company in San Francisco is going to go, okay, I can hire people in Vancouver now. But next they're going to be looking at Bangalore or, Latin America or the Philippines. And that people there are more motivated, harder working. You can pay them a fifth of the amount of a North American person, and it's an incredible comp there. I mean, what have you seen? Like, first of all, when you bring this up with people, do people push back on it, or are people generally accepting of it?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely still get people that push back and, have the kind of, you took our jobs mentality about it all. But yeah, splice in the
South Park.
Yeah. Like my argument with that is like, look, like we're in a global economy at this point. Like that ship has sailed. Like we transact and do business with people all around the world. There's no reason why a portion of your talent shouldn't or can't be overseas. And I'm not a proponent of like fire everyone and move the entire team overseas. I think the sweet spot is having a really healthy mix of, a lot of back office stuff done overseas, and then still having, leadership and senior level roles stateside. That's not to say like you can't find amazing people. I mean, Jomer was GM of the business for like 3 years. And he's my, Filipino co-founder. Like, he's awesome. We found our GM of the Latin America side of things, is in Colombia. Like, you can get awesome people, but I think that's a really healthy mix.
You've done a lot of different stuff. And now, literally today, you just announced that you sold a majority stake in Shepherd. And I'm really curious about that. How did you get to that decision? How does it feel? I remember getting my first big wire transfer, and maybe you've had a couple before, but oh my God, what a weird, crazy feeling.
Yeah. It went through yesterday. It closed yesterday. The wire came through yesterday. Yeah, it's a weird, I got my wife. I was like, hey, I think it's going to be an account. You want to log in with me, do this together. And you see the number, and we're both like, I don't know how to react. Like, do we jump up and down? It was kind of like this awkward, exciting experience. And, and then I went and played pickleball with some neighborhood buddies that was planned, and came home and went to bed. It was just, it's still a normal day.
Do you want to just talk about how Sean Purry and Nick Huber came to be involved? And
Sure.
then, because that was, I think, your first time having investors in the business, right?
So me and Jomer, my co-founder, started it in April 2020. About a year or two into it, Nick Huber, who's a self-storage operator, has a private equity fund he'll raise to buy self-storage deals. He talks about it openly on Twitter. He's got a big following.
He's a troll.
Yeah, he's great at trolling.
Loves to troll.
Yeah. But he also talks pretty openly about his self-storage deals. I think that's how he built a really big following of just other small business owners. Big proponent of just don't go after these $1 billion ideas. Go start a local business, doing some service. Don't overthink things. So he became a customer just organically. And I was aware of him. I followed him. He ended up hiring 10 people. And he actually approached me and was like, hey man, I don't know if you know who I am, but I've got a big following. What do you think about doing some sort of affiliate deal? I think I could drive a lot of business, love the business. I can talk about it genuinely. I was like, great, let's do it. So we did a really simple handshake gentleman's agreement. I think he was getting either 15 or 20% of deals that closed that were generated from him. And very quickly, he was getting 20, 30 grand checks every month. And, I think he was loving it. We were loving it. And it was growing the business pretty rapidly. But I think after about a year, he started wising up and realizing, I'm getting 20 grand a month. These guys are, their enterprise value is just exploding off of me tweeting about this thing, which, he was not wrong. It was growing the business quite a lot. So he approached again, and he's like, look, I've got to have some equity in this thing. So about a year after doing the affiliate deal, we did a deal, basically converted that into equity in the business, kind of killed the affiliate deal. And he kept doing what he's doing, kind of talking about us, but as now a partner, kind of a marketing partner. And that just kept, helping the business grow. Prior to that, when we were snowballing from word of mouth, that definitely put the lighter fuel on the business, getting him involved. And I think about another year, fast forward, Sean Purry from My First Million approached us about wanting to get involved as well. His vision was basically instead of, doing a bunch of courses or doing a bunch of ad deals, he wants to get a minority stake in a handful of businesses, and everything he does, he'll just point at those businesses and talk about those. So we were the first deal kind of in that vision for him, and did a pretty similar deal. This time though, Sean bought in to the business in pretty favorable terms. And so those two deals, I think it was a really clear fit, their audience fit to our customer base, I think is why it worked so well. So yeah, we basically had a ton of free marketing through those two deals, and really grew the business that way.
How did you come to do this deal?
We've been buddies for a long time. You're always, keeping up on what I'm up to and vice versa. And I think it was Christmas Eve one year, you texted me, you're like, hey, any interest in selling? And this was I don't know, a year and a half ago or something like that. I was like, sure, open to anything. And ended up talking with your team. You guys put together an offer. It just didn't make sense for us at the time. And we just kind of shelved that idea. But I think fast forward like another year or so, I reached back out and was open to maybe taking some money off the table, maybe selling like 10 or 20%. I sold Peel, the e-commerce business, about, 6 or 8 months ago. And that was a really awful experience. The buyers are just, tough guys to deal with. And I just kind of promised myself, like, if I ever sell Shepherd, I'm going to do it with someone I know and trust. Like, I'm not going to like shop it to, just private equity and, have a hellish experience. Like I just went through that. So my first thought was like, hit you up again, and you guys are always buying. So you guys made an offer. I took it to the rest of the guys, Jomer and Sean and Nick. And, for different reasons, they kind of convinced me maybe we shouldn't take that deal, and we carried on. But right at the end, when we were like, all right, we're going to turn this down, Nick was like, I would do this deal. Your deal was a mix of cash and stock. And Nick's like, what if I did this deal all cash? It's like, what do you mean? And so that kind of kicked off him making a formal offer that required him raising money. So it was kind of contingent on like if he could put it together.
I was playing basketball with Nick at Camp MFM. They do this annual event with Mr. Beast. And we were having lunch and we started talking about the deal. And then he kind of was like, you know what? Fuck it. Like, I want to do this. And I at the time I was like, okay, I'm not going to compete with Nick. Nick's the man. I'm sure he can go and raise the money. So yeah, it seems like it all came together in the end.
Leading up to it, I was still wrestling with like, is this the right thing to do? And we could get into that, just the psychology of selling.
How life-changing is this money?
I mean, I don't have to, work ever again if I don't want to, putting it in index funds and letting it do what it does with the markets. So yeah, we can talk about the deal. So the reason why I ended up taking the deal was, I talked to a lot of friends that have sold, gotten completely out, 100% of their shares, and just like listening to interviews and stuff. And it sounds like there's definitely, if you sell out, you have cash flow prior, business is growing, it's spitting off cash flow. And then you sell, you have this pot of money, and it goes into this like preservation mindset of like, oh no, like I got to make this last. Whereas, with business, like you're in control, you can grow this thing. And I knew myself, and I get kind of anxious about, business and just anything with that. And I think that would drive me nuts if I sold the whole thing and I was worrying about preserving it. And so the reason why I did the deal is because I got to hang on to a sizable portion of the business still, which will spit off cash flow and dividends every month. And so I can live on that cash flow and then let, the proceeds compound. And then of course, if like worst case, the business went to zero and in amount of time, like I've taken chips off the table and, it's still a win, but I don't think that's going to happen. So yeah, I mean, my debate with the whole thing internally was like, mathematically, if you look at this just as math, I will absolutely make more money if I just held the business. Like, it doesn't make sense to sell when you look at it, as a math equation. If I just hold and it keeps growing, like, I'll still own the business. At a certain point, it'll spit it off enough dividends to where I would have gotten that amount. But to me, it was a question of which regret would I be more comfortable with. It's a regret of greed, like I sold too early and this thing just kept going and it became $1 billion business that I own the majority of, or a regret of loss of, God forbid, anything can happen and the business, declined or went to zero one day and I had the opportunity to sell and I didn't take it and it was life-changing money then. Which one would I be more upset about? I wrestled with that for a while and I decided like I'm okay to live with the regret of greed. It's life-changing money still, like enough, I don't need to be a billionaire. Like I am happy to be set for life and take care of my family and still get to kind of go along for the ride without maximizing the ultimate outcome. So that's ultimately why I decided to take the deal.
That's really cool. I think that I've had that experience a couple times where I get this big pile of money and I think it's going to reduce my anxiety, but I've given up cash flow as a result. And so my cash flow is lower, and then I've got to replace that with dividends or stock appreciation or something else. And my friend Rajiv calls it molehill mindset, where you're kind of like, oh my God, I got my little molehill. Now I've got to preserve it. I have so much more to lose. So I think that's kind of an awesome setup where if you can afford to live off of your cash flow and that'll keep growing, and you can still get, super even richer by selling equity or something in the future, that's awesome. But yeah, I think like having that sense of security is really a good move. Can you talk about, in this, we did a little prep doc, and in it you mentioned like you read The Psychology of Money. What have you taken from that book, and what are you going to do with that money to try and preserve your sense of security?
I think just like the theme of that book really opened my eyes to, like, I just always thought about money and investing like a math equation. It's just like, do whatever the math says. Like, and what we just talked about is a good example of like, it's the wrong choice to sell, assuming this thing keeps growing like it is. But from a psychological perspective, it's the right decision to sell. And I think one of the things in that book too is like a mortgage. Maybe not right now with the way rates are, but typically for the last like 20 years, paying off your mortgage, if you're an investor and are investing in the markets, like, it actually doesn't make sense to pay off your mortgage, but psychologically it makes you sleep better at night. Great. Like, then that can be a great decision for you. And so I just really I think it opened my eyes to that perspective of like, you got to just do what's right for you and kind of take stock of what you get anxious about and what keeps you up at night and solve for that. And so I think stuff like that, I would, prior to that book, it was just like, yeah, why would you pay off a house, or why would you do this? Like, if, look at the numbers, but at the end of the day, like, we're all emotional. So are you going to do that? Are you going to pay off your mortgage? I haven't decided yet, but I'm a lot more likely to. We're going to be moving states and building a house, and this one I've got a sweet mortgage with. I'm sorry to hear that. What are you sorry to hear? You know my story, right? Oh, building a house. I spent 6 years building. You've built houses before. You've been through it. I know. And you're also in Texas, the great state of Texas, where they make it incredibly easy to build a house. I'll never forget the day I bought my lot that I was going to build my house on. I was texting you and you said, oh my God, me too. We're going to build a house too. And I think your house took about 8 months to be in, maybe a year. And my house took 5 years. That's the difference between Canada and Texas. Yeah. I would have a different feeling if it took 5 years or anything close to that. I don't know. My wife and I are gluttons for punishment when it comes to home building. I used to want to be an architect. I've always been interested in design, and especially architecture. And my wife is an interior designer by trade. So it's one of those things of like, what can you spend your money on? Things that you really enjoy. And we actually really enjoy this stuff for the most part. It does get tedious and there's a lot of decision fatigue, but yeah, we do enjoy it. So I'm curious, actually, two things. Three. So are you going to change anything lifestyle wise? 2, are you going to buy yourself a toy? Like, are you going to buy a stupid car or something like that? And then 3, what are you going to do every day? Like, how are you going to spend your time? But yeah, let's start with number 1. So what are you going to change lifestyle wise? Are you going to upgrade? Are you going to stay the same? You said you're going to build this house. Yeah, I think the house for the most part is kind of the only plan. It was honestly in the works prior to the deal. We were going to do it irregardless, but yeah, that's kind of the one thing that we're planning on doing. I think overall, not a lot's going to change. Like, maybe we'll, pay for a babysitter more often to have like an extra date night with my wife, just like stuff like that. But for the most part, I don't think a lot is going to change. I do like cars. I think that. I've always loved cars. So I have some fun cars. I'll probably add, maybe 1 or 2 more to the collection. But yeah, that'll probably be my dumb purchase, if you will. So there's nothing that you've like picked out to celebrate or anything like that? No, I like, watches are cool, cars are cool, but in the near term, no. Like, I don't have garage space, and I don't know. I'm just gonna, like, as much as I can. A lot of advice was given to me of just like, just sit with the money for as long as you can. Just get used to it. Don't like be the dumb like lottery winner and go out and spend a bunch of money, and then 6 months you wake up, you're like, oh my God, I spent way, like, just like, don't, just hang on to it, just get comfortable with it. So honestly, no, I mean, the house is the only thing in the works.
It's interesting. It's kind of like when you've been with a long-term girlfriend and then you get married, and it's like, well, we already live together. Like, well, there's really nothing different. You just wake up one day and you've signed a legal document. And that's kind of like what it feels like to sell your company. I had this experience where I was already doing really well. I already had more than enough money and I was able to do whatever I wanted. And then I sold a business and I had this big amount of money in the bank, and there's nothing I wanted to change. And it was kind of like this weird feeling of like, okay, I've won the business game, but like, I don't feel anything. Like I don't, yeah, it's very strange. It every time I go through something like this, it kicks off an existential crisis, which leads into my next question. So what are you going to do all day? Like if you take the money part out of it, right? Ultimately you're getting richer for money, but you're adding to a bank account where you don't necessarily need more money, and it doesn't change your lifestyle. So like, where's the meaning going to come from, and what do you want your work life to be?
Yeah. I mean, I've always, well, not always, I used to want to, I was inspired by the Gates and Zucks of the world, but very quickly realized I just wanted freedom. So to me, it's like, I just secured freedom, like, ultimately down the road, as long as I'm not stupid with it all. But as far as day to day, like I think my wife was like, I give you till Christmas before you start another company. But I'm like, I don't know. There's a lot of hobbies I want to explore and books I want to read. Like I like to read. I just, feel like more obligated to sit down at my computer and handle work when I had a daily role. But yeah, I mean, my plan is to just like dive into some hobbies that I've gotten into that I haven't had a lot of time to mess with. Like, I mean, really cheap stuff like pickleball and golf and tennis. And then honestly, like there's a lot of people via Twitter and locally and stuff like that I'd love to get to know better, that I find really interesting, that I just felt like, it'd be great to get to know these people, if it makes sense, but I need to like work on my business. Like I've got a job at the end of the day is how I viewed things, where now I feel like I have the freedom and time to like, yeah, sure. Like, let's do this podcast. Let's, random people I want to meet up with and just get to know better. But I mean, past that, I'm just going to dive into interests and see where that leads me. I'm sure it'll eventually lead to starting something or getting involved with some sort of organization. Like I like to build stuff at the end of the day. It's kind of my creative outlet. So I'm sure eventually I'll start something else, with all the lessons learned.
Is there any older person that you've met that you think is a good North Star that you want to be like?
Twitter to me was like the way I, got involved and connected with like Silicon Valley and tech and, how we met and met my old co-founder. And I still like am a huge proponent of how awesome Twitter is. But lately I've got to know like just some local people, like local business owners that, are super quiet, don't want to be talked about. Like I'm not going to even name names, just like, and I think there's a lot of great stuff to learn from people like that. For every awesome, huge influencer on Twitter, there's like 1,000 really successful business owners that own some boring business that are living a happy life. So I've got to know someone locally that he's got a cool story, and he's got basically like a ditch digging business that has been operating for like 20 years, just, slowly compounding over time, doing deals, growing and growing. We met through love of cars. He's got a really great collection, but yeah, I just love meeting people like that have built like a quote unquote boring business that they just slowly grew over 20, 30 years. And, the endurance that it takes to kind of do that, I have a lot of respect for. I think that's really, really cool. I feel like I work in bursts and, got out of this thing in 4 or 5 years versus, I have a lot of respect for people that do the opposite and do that thing for their career.
I'm super curious to see what you do next. And I'm excited to talk to you about your existential crisis when it happens. So let's get tactical. What does your typical day look like? Like, do you do any weird stuff, or is it pretty traditional?
I think the one weird thing that I do is I track my time with Harvest. And like, I don't bill my time out. Like there's no need to track it. The reason why I do it, probably done it for like 4 years now. And I just use their little task manager app in the top right corner, turn it on, and I'll choose like, I'm really simple about how I break up the categories. It's like, company, investing, content. I'll do one breakout for emails. And I think I've got like a miscellaneous one. But the reason why I do it is it's a look back function. Like I'll look back at, a month or a week or a year. It's like, hey, what projects or companies were I spending my time on? Is that in line with like what I wanted to be doing? And so anytime it's not, then it's kind of my ability to kind of course correct. Like I'm not super regimented on my calendar, so I can't really like look back and, oh, I was spending too much time on this or that. Like it literally gives me the quantifiable number of, there was a time when I was like, all right, I'm going to start delegating as much as possible. And so I wanted to see like time spent on different, businesses as I delegated things out going down. So I think that's been super helpful for me. It's been like kind of my tool to hold myself accountable for trying to be as effective as possible and efficient as possible.
That's really weird. I've never heard anyone do that. I haven't used Harvest in probably 15 years. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Those guys are still going, hey?
Yeah. They're getting $12 a month for me for years.
They're bootstrappers. They've bootstrapped that whole business for like 20 years. I bet it's pretty huge now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great product. Super simple.
Let's talk books. What are a couple books that have really made a big impact for you?
Yeah, you asked this question and I was trying to think like, I don't have one single book or a handful. And I'm like, man, after reading that, I completely changed my life. Honestly, and I can name a few books and why, but I think really the biggest thing has always been just like exposure to people and ideas. Like I always talk about Twitter. Like Twitter to me was the ultimate exposure to just like people doing like real small business stuff. Like the guys from 37 Signals were like, an early follow. And I think that probably had the biggest impact on me was like, I wanted to be, Zuck and change the world. And then I started following these people and was like, oh, you can have like a much smaller business that isn't like world changing and just like change your life and your co-founders and your employees' lives through this thing. Like, that's probably been the biggest impact to me is just like seeing that and opening myself up to new ideas like that. That's also come through books, of course. Like I've read all of their stuff, like what is it, Getting Real and Rework and stuff like that from the 37 Signals guys. Like that was getting inside their head of like how they think about business. Yeah, I think really opened up my eyes. Like I used to overcomplicate business. Like you got to have this world changing. It's the idea. You got to have this awesome idea, like a new way to a paradigm shift. I think over time I realized like business is really simple. Like it doesn't mean it's easy or anything, but like you got to have three things. You got to have an offer, a way to deliver it, and a steady flow of customers. And like, that's it. Like inside of that, of course, is, great marketing and copywriting and, delegation and, positioning and pricing and all that. But like, as long as you nail those things as a concept, you can have a sweet business.
Anything you'd recommend people read?
Yeah, an early one that's an old book, 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And I think they did a follow-up that's like 22 Immutable Laws of Positioning, maybe I think was the other one. That was probably the most important marketing book I ever read. Like, each chapter, it's been so long since I read it, but I think each chapter gets into like, just the different ways you can position a business. Like if you're not number one, well then focus on being the different one. If you're not that, then focus on this. And it's just like this ladder of like, if you're not that, then go to this one. If you're not that, then go to this one. And it just like, 22 way all the way down, you can still kind of find your like into the market. That book for whatever reason always stuck with me when thinking about, the pitch or how we're going to position a company entering, the market. Like Peel, for example, like there was a ton of iPhone case companies. Like what, how are we going to be different? It's like, we'll be the thinnest, we'll be the most of X thing. And in our case, we were going to be the thinnest one, and that resonated. So I always love that book. I always come back to it when thinking about new stuff. Principles by Dalio. Just the one idea of thinking about a business like a machine that you can tweak over time and kind of change the result based on those tweaks. Just that analogy, I think, is always stuck with me from that book. And it's just a great way to look at like, when you have a problem in your business or it's, you want to improve your margins or whatever, like thinking about it like that, when I read that was really helpful over time as I was kind of trying to change things in different companies.
Yeah, it's funny. I had the exact same experience reading that book. It was totally boring. And then I read that one thing and had the epiphany. And there's been books where I've just read the summary or the title and then it's changed something for me. So one was The Now Habit, right? The idea is so simple. It shouldn't be a book. It's just do the thing when you think about it. That's it, right? It's ridiculous. I don't know how that's a book, but so often I feel like I remember like one sentence from every book I've read.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of books behind me. Like I don't claim to have read all those cover to cover at all, but there's so many books where it's just like you get one little thing or it's just like a chapter and a few paragraphs in it. And you're like, that was the winning idea. Yeah, I mean, that's honestly why I love Twitter. Like you get people's take in the most condensed way and what they're up to. And yeah, don't get me wrong though. I do think there's a lot of value, especially in older books like that have stood the test of time.
Okay. What about weird health stuff? Do you do anything weird?
So one thing that I really love is this app called Future. I think it's like future.co. It's basically a personal trainer, but I always thought personal training was stupid, but you're paying someone $100. The value of a personal trainer in my eyes is like to set up your routine of what you're going to do. But I don't need you to stand there and watch me do it for an hour. Like just tell me what I should do. And then like, I'll just go do it. And that's basically what the app is. Like they pair you with a personal trainer and they, based on your goals, you can have a phone call with them or whatever. They'll craft a routine and they, change it every week. And they've got some guides on, proper form on stuff. That's it. Like you don't need the person to watch you do a workout. So I really love that. I think it's like $150 a month or $200 a month. I think it's gone up to $200 a month now. But yeah, I've been using that for years. So I really love that service.
What's something you did recently that made you go, I can't believe I didn't do this sooner?
So I've always loved, delegation and, it's how you grow a company. And I've always tried to get better and better at it. But I had never hired a CEO to take over for me. I've done like GMs and, things like that. But ultimately the buck stopped with me. But about a month ago, we hired a CEO leading up to this deal. I was like, why didn't I do this sooner? Like I'm good at the like 0 to 1 stuff. Like I enjoy that. I'm really good at it. I'm probably good from like, 0 to 5 is kind of how I joke with people. Like I'm decent with like the getting it past the off the ground stuff, but I mean, we're 150 people at this point. I don't enjoy everything that comes with that. And we got someone that like loves it and is great at it and is like a coach to people. Like I think they love him way better than they loved me. Like it was just like, this is a win-win. Like, why didn't I do this sooner? So yeah, we hired him. It was kind of part of the deal, but it was also one of these things where it's like, if the deal falls through or whatever, like I'm still on board with, I want to hire a CEO. Like I don't think I'm the right person to take this forward. And so we got someone and it just happened to be about a month before the deal closed. He got started and it's been awesome. Like I'm kicking myself for not doing it 2 years ago.
That's awesome. Such a good feeling. It's funny. I feel like, if just to use like a soccer analogy, it's like, let's say you love playing soccer and like, when you got a 5-person team, you're just playing soccer with your buddies and it's really fun. But suddenly when you have a 150-person team, you can't play soccer anymore. You're the coach. And like, you didn't set out to be the coach. You want to play soccer. And it's like a completely different skill set. So yeah, I'm glad you're experiencing that because it is such a relief. And, now you're going to have different problems, but that's awesome. What about, I'm going to put you on this spot here, but do you have any random business ideas? Like what are things that you think someone should go start that you're not going to, that you just want to put out in the world that, some young entrepreneur listening to this should go and start?
Yeah. I want a really simple, kind of like this Harvest app, little task manager app that only opens the Gmail compose window. Like everyone, is always trying to be in their email less. And I haven't seen someone make an app that is just like, you can call it send only. Because like, throughout the day, you need to send emails all the time. But to send an email, you open your inbox and there's, the fire hose of everything. I just want that. Like I'd pay, whatever one time or whatever it is. But I think you could build that as part of like productivity suite. Like any of these companies that have the thing to kind of block you from being able to do your email or social networking, like one of them should come out with something like that.
What's funny is I made that. I have that. That's so random. So I use Raycast, which is like, it replaces Spotlight on the Mac. And I wanted this because I basically have tried to lock myself out of my email for the same reason, because I'd be like, oh, I need to email, Chris about something, and I just want to send off a quick email and then get back to what I'm doing. And then I would see like 5 stressful things. And then the next thing I know, it's 2 hours later and I've, gone off down a rabbit hole. And so I got Pedro, who's the CEO of Raycast, to build a little extension called Dash Off. So if you text me, I'll send you a link.
Okay.
But what you do is you sync it with your Gmail, and then you can just send it. You can preset up to like 10 different recipients, and you just say like, I'll dash off something to my assistant while I'm in the middle of something else. And then the other thing I've been doing lately is I don't actually look at my email. I have my assistant go through my email, and she puts only the things I need to respond to in a Google Doc. And so I can't get distracted. I just look at like 10 or 20 emails a day and I respond in line, and then she sends them. And so I'm never seeing my Gmail basically.
So that's literally sitting in a Google Doc, like you're typing in there, you finish it.
Literally a Google Doc. And I just text
paste
her and I say, hey, the emails for the 29th are done. And sometimes I'll ignore my email for 5 days and I'll batch it. Other times I'm up to date. It depends on what's going on, but I feel like I've finally conquered email.
That's awesome.
You got any other ones?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is what I would do in my next company, just as a theme. So I can talk about it. I mean, looking at why Shepherd grew a ton, I think we hit product market fit, and it was, we kind of rode a wave and all of that, and had a lot of word of mouth, but the partnerships with Nick and Sean, just grew the business a ton. And so whatever I do, I think in my next company, I basically want to do a studio model where we will incubate. We'll do one of two things. We'll incubate different ideas that we have a influencer or a handful or a category of influencer in mind to partner with, whether it's an e-commerce thing and that's a good fit for, Twitch streamer or whatever, and then get it off the ground, and then go, try to do that deal. And I think the flip side would be, going out and finding that kind of perfect influencer for a thing, and then crafting a business and an idea around them to do together that fits their audience quite well. So I think I'm good at that kind of, getting stuff off the ground, but also the what's the right fit for this person, whether they're a interior design influencer, or a guy in my neighborhood is actually a really big Twitch streamer, and he's always complaining about just having to do all these brand deals. I have an idea for him. There's, stuff that I think would be a great fit and would be a clear buy for his audience, and wouldn't have to, do brand deals all the time. So I just think that, you guys did the am I saying yerba mate correctly? Deal with Huberman.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear how that's going, because that's a perfect fit for his audience. He's always talking about it. I think that kind of stuff is such a cheat code in growing a business that I'm definitely planning to do again next round. Yeah.
I'm literally drinking it right now. Yeah, we've done that. And we've done that a bunch of times actually. And sometimes it works really well. Other times the influencer is not a business person, or they're a bit of a diva or complicated. And I'm not referring to any of our current partnerships. We've been really good about identifying people who are low drama, low ego, awesome to deal with. So the 2 times we've recently done this is with James Clear from Atomic Habits and Dr. Andrew Huberman from Huberman Lab. And in those instances, it's been really, really good. And we call it 1 + 1 = 100, right? You think about what is the number one cost of a business. Often it's marketing. If you look at a P&L for most consumer packaged goods, e-com companies, software even, they're spending 30% of the P&L on marketing. And so let's say that they're going to spend $3 million a year on marketing to grow. If you have that person as a business partner, they're basically adding $3 million of profit to the bottom line. So yeah, I think that's an awesome idea. Super smart.
Yeah, I think you're going to see more and more of that. There's huge businesses, I think they're going to come out of that, that Prime energy drink, that's going to be a massive, massive business. And they're just talking about it all the time instead of doing these brand deals. So yeah, I think it's a mix of getting the right influencer, someone either they know naturally, or you have to coach them through how to talk about this and bring it up, and not just be we're going to take a break, for my company sponsor, but to be more organic, And then I just think it's so important that the idea kind of fit the audience. Like, Mr. Beast is awesome, but if we did a deal for Shepherd with Mr. Beast, like it wouldn't have worked, like massive audience, but like it's a bunch of kids, like stuff like that is super important, obviously.
I'm curious, what are a couple products that you can't live without that you'd recommend to the audience?
Yeah, I wish Apple would start making ultra wide monitors. I've had an ultra wide monitor for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And I tried the nice Apple monitor. I have a really even hard time working from a laptop these days. Like it's like, you can fit 3 windows wide. I've got like you in the center. I've got notes on the side. I've got, some settings over here. And I just like cannot go back. It's good and bad, but yeah, I definitely have really enjoyed buying an upgraded super wide monitor.
So when you're working, so then this is like one of those gaming ones, right? So it like goes around.
It's slightly curved. Yeah.
Is it bent? Slightly curved. Yep. And how would you use it? So like I get it right now, but let's say you're working on something like, isn't it distracting? You're having your email on one side and chats on another or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I still try to single task, but even like, I feel like if I'm in like a Google Doc, like a spreadsheet, I'm usually looking at or inputting data from something else. Like you usually want at least 2 windows side by side. I feel like for most things, like maybe we're talking about something in Slack and I'm looking at what we're talking about, in the other window. Like I find there's usually 2 windows needed for a lot of work things, unless you're just sitting down and, writing into a doc and just thinking about that. Like I feel like I'm typically needing 2 windows. And so it just gives the breathing room for it.
Okay, final question. If you were to do one other career, so let's say you hadn't struck it rich, you're not allowed to be an entrepreneur, start a business, what career would you do?
Something in architecture, whether it's being an architect. I also used to want to be like a video game designer. I just think like making a world or a house or a building, just like a creator of that is such a cool job. It's always of interest to me. Yeah, so something in that space, one or the other.
That's really cool. Well, dude, it was good chatting with you. That was fun.
Yeah.
Congrats on all the success and the big win. That's amazing. And I'm looking forward to talking in 3 months and finding out you've spent it all on solid gold rocket cars and all sorts of silly things. Dude, that's
Thanks,
awesome.
man.
Congrats.
Yeah, it's good catching up.
Yeah.
We can plug your book too. I know this is titled after your book. It's awesome. I read it. I told you I read it in like a day on vacation. And yeah, it was
very appropriate given what you're going through right now.
Exactly. Yeah. Timing's great. I could relate with some of the early motivations and stuff. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that come out.